We're going to make a Sanders style LC filter. This is useful in case you have a bunch of noise in the power line going to your video transmitter or video camera. The noise, you might see it when you throttle up on your motor and you see a bunch of horizontal lines or static in your video feed. So this is a Sanders style LC filter. You can find more information on this on rcgroups.com. Just look up the Sanders style RC filter and you should find the information. This video will just walk you through it quickly on how to build one. So the first thing you need are some ferrites. These are rather large, 16 outer diameter by 6 by 9. The first LC filter I made used these smaller ferrites, which are about 3/4 the size, and they worked pretty well, but I still got some noise. So I'm going to try and build a second one with these larger ferrites and try to wrap more wire around them. The second thing you need is an electrolytic capacitor, 1000 microfarads rated at 25 volts. One thing to note on these capacitors is this is the negative side of the cap. It's usually got a gray stripe going down the side that has a bunch of negative signs on it. Really important to make sure that negative sign pin, that ground pin, gets soldered to your ground wire. The other pin will get soldered to your positive voltage wire. If you get it reversed, this capacitor will explode, so be really careful. Wear eye protection if you're not sure if you have it right. And lastly, we need some servo wire. Alright, so I got some servo wire, and I'm only going to use the red and the brown wires for this, so I'm going to peel back the signal wire. And just go ahead and start wrapping this wire around the ferrite. The first one I built, I only got about 8 or 10 wraps around this small ferrite. Okay, we got 12. Awesome. So, one side of this wire is going to get soldered straight to your power supply, or if you're using a current sensor, solder this to the output on your current sensor, so any power being used by your video system will be picked up by your current sensor. If you're not using a current sensor, just solder it straight to your battery wires or to the positive, negative terminals on your power distribution board. So the next step is to solder on the capacitor, and we want this to be in series going to supply power to your video transmitter. So the way I like to do this is I like to strip some of the insulation away from the wire in the middle, solder the cap straight to the wires, wrapping some of the copper wire around the terminals to get some mechanical strength holding the parts together before I actually solder them. And then throw some heat shrink wrapping around these to cover up the exposed wire, and then put a servo connector on the end. So let's go ahead and do that. So when you solder the cap onto the exposed part of the wire, I like to make sure that the pins on the capacitor are pointing the direction the wires are, so then later I can just throw some heat shrink over this and capture the pins at the same time. So I'm going to start with the ground side. Ground side of the cap gets soldered on. Get a little bit more exposed wire. just wrap that around a couple times, and then we're going to solder right where the copper is wrapped around the capacitor. Alright, looks like a nice, good solder joint. And once you've got that soldered on, you can clip off the excess part of the capacitor terminal. So it's nice and tidy. And I'm going to do the same thing for the positive side. So I'm going to be lazy. I happen to have this servo connector lying around with only 1/2. So I'm just going to solder these wires together. Alternatively, you could put together a new servo connector if you don't want to have a wire-to-wire connection. Okay guys, let's get the hot glue on here. Okay, and lastly, if you guys have it, this is some 3/4 inch heat shrink tubing, and you can put this around your LC filter assembly to make it look nice and tidy. Also protect the components from getting damaged or scratched by anything else you might have floating around. It doesn't want to go in. Yeah, it's tight. Whew, okay, tight fit, but I got it in. So, I could use a heat gun, but I'm going to be lazy and just use a lighter. If you do this, just be careful not to heat up components too much. You don't want to melt any of the insulation. Alright guys, that's it. So here's my LC filter. And I just have to install this into my system. I should be good to go. Thanks for watching.